Good morning and welcome to Wednesday. It's October the 19th, 2022. And that means it's time for the Education Town Hall here on We Act Radio, which is located in the heart of downtown Anacostia. However, we're coming to you live from our virtual platform that is Anacostia adjacent. I first want to begin by thanking the creator for this day and for the opportunity to present to you the latest installment of the Education Town Hall. This is your humble servant and host, Thomas Bird, and I'll be joined shortly by my associate producer, Valerie Jablow. And folks, I think we're going to have a wonderful show today. We have a number of State Board of Education candidates joining us. The folks joining us today are Ben Williams, Ward 1, who's currently a teacher at Capital City Public Charter School. We have Michael uh, Sriqui, who's a Ward 3.
Thanks, Thomas.
Yes, who's a Ward 3 ANC commissioner and DCPS parent. We also have joining us Robert Henderson, who's a Ward 5 charter school parent who was instrumental in reestablishing the Ward 5 Council on Education, which used to support this show very, very much. And also, last but not least, Joshua Wiley, who's a Ward 6 and currently assistant principal at DCPS's Whittier Elementary School. So I look forward to a very engaging conversation. It's going to be wide ranging. We will try to cover as many topics as possible. I want to begin by thanking each of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. This is an important conversation, I think. And so now I'm going to do as I normally do. I'm going to stand aside for a moment and let Valerie, my very capable associate producer, get us started.
Thank you.
Good morning, Valerie, and you got the show.
Thank you, Thomas. Welcome, State Board candidates. I wanted to ask each of you if you could each take a minute to tell us why you're running. And I wanted to start counting down from Ward 6. So take it away, Joshua Wiley.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Like the two hosts said, my name is Joshua Wiley. I'm running for State Board of Education, Ward 6. I'm running for a couple different reasons. I'm running because I know our children deserve the best. Currently, there is no DC public school voice on the State Board of Education. And the past 2 years have definitely shown us what education can be, what improvements needs to be made, and what's working great. And I think the State Board of Education needs someone who's actually in the schools every day with the students, with the teachers, with the parents. And that's why I'm running for State Board of Education.
Robert Henderson, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Valerie and Thomas, for having me. I'm here. My journey here started when my then 7-year-old son asked me if schools are still segregated in DC. And when I realized that my 7-year-old was seeing school segregation before his eyes, I was motivated to get more involved, and I have done that through the Ward 5 Education Equity Committee, which is the reconstituted Ward 5 Ed Council. And as I've gotten more and more involved, I've just been exposed to more and more things about our system that I think we need to change and we need to fight to change. So I am looking to join the State Board of Education so that I can do as much as I can so that when my son continues to ask me hard questions, I'll be able to answer him and say that I've tried to make our schools better.
Excellent. Michael Sriqui.
Thanks, Valerie. Greetings, fellow candidates. The primary reason why I want to run is to be a reliable link to transparency and to helping families navigate what can be a complex school system. That's part of what I've done in my own time as a volunteer in schools with my school DC, just trying to push for transparency and reliability and an informative approach to the school lottery for all parents that want to engage with it. And again, hearing from Ben and Joshua, I think it's really, really important that state board members have a skin in the game when it comes to the public system. In my race, I'm the only person running who has children whose family has made the choice to send their kids to public school. So I think that's really important. I don't understand why you would be interested in helping oversee the public school system if you don't even have a presence in it. So those are some of the reasons that I'm interested in getting involved.
Thank you, Ben. Williams?
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Thomas, as well, for hosting. Hello, fellow candidates. So my name is Ben Williams. I'm a teacher. I'm also a community advocate for Ward 1 and for DC schools. And similar to reasons that, Robert, Josh, and Michael had mentioned, I'm running to really elevate community voice for Ward 1 and for DC schools. I think that, when policymakers make decisions that are in tune with the needs of students and in the needs of families and in the needs of teachers, then we can get schools that work more equitably for everyone. And too often there's a disconnect between what schools need and what kids need and what teachers need and what the policymakers choose for our schools and not in conjunction with community to improve our schools. So I've been working as an advocate outside of just the role of teacher for the last 5 years. Am deeply troubled by the amount of teachers leaving the classroom in DC schools, and want to make sure that we can make more equitable schools so that we can have better outcomes and a brighter future for DC students and DC residents.
Excellent.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Listen, I'm sorry, Valerie.
No, to Thomas, I wanted you to go.
Yes. So you've all given some very laudable, good reasons why you are running. So I want to begin by asking each of you. We can start with Ben, Robert, Joshua, then Michael. What do you feel is the very biggest or most important issue that needs to be addressed that you can have effect on as a state board representative? What is the important? What's the first thing you need to do? You need to really change this. This is the most important thing. What is that?
Thanks, Thomas. I think a tough question, and I could take this a lot of different ways. And I do want to allude to kind of the general inequities in DC that Robert had mentioned, because I think that what happens outside of the school building also impacts what happens within the school building. But in the role of state board education, I really see the state board playing a pivotal role, getting at the bottom of the problem of teacher turnover in our city. And DC has the highest rate of educators leaving the classroom. It's only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Advocate with Empower Ed, a teacher voice nonprofit, I've been really pushing the state board, working with the council to make sure that we have clear data around how many teachers are leaving the schools. And we have, over a fourth of teachers, 30% of teachers leaving every year. Those rates are higher for special educators. So, kids with special needs who rely on that stability of having a teacher that they can trust lose out on that when teachers leave the. And then a lot of the programming that needs to get implemented can't be implemented when you don't have reliable teachers. I'll end by saying kind of like it really breaks my heart at the end of every year when students will ask me, hey, Mr. Williams, are you back next year? Or they're asked their other teachers, are you going to be back next year? That's not an issue that I had to deal with growing up as a student. And I don't think it's something that our students and families deserve as well in our school system. So I think the state board of that issue to improve the profession and keep our best teachers in DC schools.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, I want to answer similarly to Ben with acknowledging kind of a split between what is really the purview of the board and then how I feel like I really need to answer this question. I promised myself I wouldn't pass up an opportunity to say that the economic inequities, the housing instability, food insecurity, those issues are really important for educational outcomes for students in DC. And I think it's really important for people in any space, including education space, to say that, and we really need to address those issues if we want to improve outcomes for students. But to the side of where the board has more authority and purview, I think the teacher retention issue is critical. I would also add a need for an approach to DC schools as a district, as a cohesive school district that is governed and regulated in a way that we are making sure that the system is working comprehensively across sectors in ways that support better student outcomes. I don't think we do that well right now.
Okay, thank you, Joshua.
Thank you. And my issues kind of mirror what the first two candidates said. I think teacher retention is a really big thing, because when a teacher leaves a profession, it's not only they're not just leaving the profession, they're leaving the community. Kids are losing their best friend, kids are losing their mentors, communities are losing a second pair of eyes on their students. So I think we need to do a better job in making sure we're keeping our teachers, but also making sure that our teachers are able to teach state-of-the-art, up-to-date curriculum. Common Core state standards were adopted over a decade ago. Making sure we're keeping those updated and adding courses like financial literacy and other relevant courses into the framework of our students' education.
Thank you for that, Joshua. Michael, you're next. I just want to let Valerie know that I have a follow-up question, then I'll come back to you, Valerie. Go ahead, Michael.
Right. Thanks, Thomas. So let me take a stab at this by looking at something like more high level first, which is, and if you would address it directly to teacher retention, I think the four of us will probably agree. I think the state board has to keep its eye on, getting away from this kind of insistence on top level uniformity for everything, and develop a more flexible approaches where they're needed. So, in the sense of teachers, not necessarily interacting with teachers through mandates from central office and atop, but really developing policies that show that we have more trust and respect for the work and their professionalism that they do. And then, certainly a challenge that I'm also interested in is just more transparency on what the plan is in terms of recovery from coronavirus and missed school. I will tell you that, I'm running to represent Ward 3, and my family and a good number of my neighbors were able to afford learning pods during the pandemic, where if there wasn't a private tutor being hired, there was space procured where kids could get together and be in a, let's say, classroom-like environment, at least, where they could do their remote learning. I think that was a big advantage. And if we look at the disappointment in scores that we've seen so far, what we don't often think is that Ward 3 was rolled into those scores. And as far as I know, there was some loss, but Ward 3 students basically held their own. So the data is actually, indicative of something much worse on the level of learning loss. So there needs to be a more transparent plan than what we've heard from leadership so far in terms of coming back.
Thank you for that. So as you all may know, prior to 2007, there was a local school board here in the District of Columbia, which at that point we transformed our education system to what it currently is. I want to ask each of you, give me the short answer. Would you prefer to have a local board or a state board, and why? I'll start with you, Michael.
I'm happy having a state board. I'm more or less happy with I'm more or less convinced that the governance structure works from a structural standpoint. That doesn't mean that there aren't changes that could be made, but structurally, I think it's probably the best system that we can have.
Why do you feel that way? Because structurally, the mayor is in charge, and the mayor is a political actor. So that makes education political. Period.
Well, that's right. And if there's a local board that's elected directly, that also implies a political element to it. I think what having the mayor in charge has been beneficial for is certainly if you look at areas like budget. I think that's good, and I think it's good that an issue like education that we all care about is under the spotlight, under the public spotlight. And when it's under the mayor, that means it's under the public spotlight because that's where attention is the highest. Where there's some accountability issues, I would point to the relationship between the mayor and the superintendent, for example, where we rely on the superintendent to undertake a robust and objective and thorough assessment of school performance, but the superintendent then is a direct report to of the mayor, who the people hold accountable for that performance. So again, putting ideology on this issue aside a little bit and just looking at the structure, that isn't the best system. I don't think it promotes public confidence in the system. So, I think there are reasons to undo that relationship. And Thomas, as you mentioned, also making educational too political, that tethers the superintendent and OSSI to the mayor's political time cycle. And that's wrong also. I would rather see, something where the superintendent might serve for 6 years, but it wouldn't be contiguous with a mayoral term. That would introduce a little bit more independence into the system.
Okay, Joshua. I'm not going to unpack any of that. I'm gonna just let y'all roll with it because there's a whole bunch I could unpack. But anyway, go ahead, Joshua.
As we mentioned before, I'm the assistant principal at a school, and I say that for an elementary school to be exact. And I say that for a couple reasons, right? Because in elementary and social studies, they learn about checks and balances, right? In our government, there's no checks and balances right now in our current education governance system. It's one person that runs it, and And I also say I'm an assistant principal because I have been affected by some of the decisions that have been made by the person who's responsible for education. It's the mayor, that may not have the best interest of, or may not have the background knowledge of someone who actually works in the school. As far as I know, she's never taught in the school, So I think we need a governing body that's elected of individuals who have that education knowledge, that has that education experience, like the State Board of Education. We live in DC. And so the mayor is responsible for everything: housing, crime, jobs, healthcare. So when is education ever going to be number one over jobs, housing, crime, healthcare? So I think we need to separate that and go for a state board. Thank you.
State board, not local. Okay, got you. Robert?
I think we should have both. We should have a state board and a state. We should be a state. We should have a state executive, a state board, an office of the state superintendent to do the state functions, and then we should have a local school board to do the local functions. I think, Michael, I agreed with a lot of what you said, and I conclude from much of what you said that we do need to change the structure for exactly the reasons you said about the ways that too many people are reporting to the mayor. It undercuts the ability of the state superintendent to do the job they're supposed to do.
Thank you, Robert. And now over to Ben.
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem to me in a system of mayoral control is what Joshua said, that there lacks checks and balances. And as a government teacher who teaches U.S. government and AP government, right, I think that oversight and accountability are really good things for getting good governance. So I also think it is a false dichotomy, because I think that we need both a state board and a local elected school board. I think, in terms of, there's many ways in what that could look like, in my view. And I think we need to kind of, as a city, start moving towards a more nuanced conversation of this. And so I think OSSI 1 definitely needs to be independent of the mayor, so that you are allowed to have an oversight of both sectors that is apolitical, that is not tied to kind of whether she looks good or not, or he or she looks good or not. Because what we've seen is when that happens is it results in scandals, such as, test, the attendance scandals, the test score scandals, and it results
Data
in
manipulation.
exactly, like nobody wants that. And schools are going to respond to the pressures and incentives that they're put under, and so we need to make sure that those incentives are useful and can respond to the real needs that communities are having. So I'll kind of stop there, but I think that there's one more thing I want to say, I guess, is that like I think that can look like a lot of ways. Like the council can initiate, certain nominees of who can serve in these positions, and then the mayor can have some say, as to who she appoints, or the state board could do that too. And I think if we're going to move into a school board, we also need to build up the capacity of that school board, right? Because people in DC are very scared of if we have a school board that we'd be going backwards, or going back to what things were like. And I think we need to change the mindset that a school board with resources and with other governance changes would actually be moving forward for our city.
All right. Thank
Ben
you.
mentioned one thing that caught my attention, which is like resources within the board. There's an interesting issue where, the Ward 3 member represents 13 schools. It's soon to be, I guess there's a charter school and then 2 more. So I guess it's going to be 16. But even so, with that increase, I believe the Ward 8 member represents over 40. And, from my understanding, resources and staff time that are given from OSSI to the board are allocated equally across the 8 wards. I don't think that's a very good system, given the attention, and the directions, the multiple more directions that hopefully future colleagues of mine from other wards are pulled into compared to me. So we should probably both advocate for greater funding, but fairer allocation of staff resources on the board.
Okay, I know Valerie has a number of questions, so I'll step aside.
Oh, so I did want to note in relationship to the independence of OSSI, I saw on Twitter this morning that last night there was a political group called Elect Ed DC that met with the OSSI superintendent. So it's a political group to increase, I guess, political representation, excuse me, in schools east of the river. And they had a meeting with the OSSI superintendent. And it was just sort of, out there. There it is right there, But I guess in relationship to our governance, I am very, excuse me, I'm very unclear as to where charter schools fit in on this. And the reason I am unclear on this is because the mayor is clearly in control of DCPS. She is in control. She is assigned a deputy mayor for education who's in control, and she appoints the chancellor. There's a direct line of accountability there. But charter schools do not have that direct line of accountability. And when we talk about, either a local or a state board, I have never actually been very clear as to what accountability charter schools have to either a local board, as it used to be here in DC, or as it may be again, or the current state board. And I was wondering if you could mull that over and jump in whenever you wanted. Maybe Joshua, you should start, and then we can go from there. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question part one more time?
Sure, now that I've cleared my throat. So whether you have a local state board or a state board as it's currently constituted, how would charter schools be under that, given that right now there's no direct publicly elected official who is actually in charge of them? And let me state further, the charter board is appointed by the mayor and and approved by the council, but then they are their own entity. They're an independent body, much like I think the DC Housing Authority, which we all know about, was in the news. I mean, there's not a whole lot of direct public control of charter schools. And then they're further removed from direct public control, of course, because they're all run by private nonprofits.
So I think Valerie's trying to get to, how can we improve that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, because all schools in DC serve all DC students, they should serve DC students. And so I think that all schools should be held to the same accountability. All teachers should have the same fair unions at school. All students should receive the same services. Have access to the same services. All schools should be required to do the same type of reporting, no matter if it's a charter school, if it's a public school, because, we want to do what's best for the children. So for what one school does or is required to report, the next school should be required to report. I think everyone needs to be under one umbrella when it comes to accountability, transparency, and equity.
What structure needs to be put in place to achieve that?
You need to have a governing board that controls both public and charter schools. It needs to have like the same set of rules for both.
So how do you get there? I mean, that's another question I wanted to ask all of you. How, whether it's a local school board or a combined local and state board, how do we get to that point too?
Jump in. Who's first?
In here. Okay. I'm sorry. What did you say, Thomas?
No, go ahead.
Well,
so I would ask you to speed up your responses.
There are a couple ways I think of getting there. I think that's, Valerie, you alluded to this, right, is making OSSI independent of the mayor, right? There needs to be a central oversight board. The state board has no statutory authority to initiate anything with OSSI or with the PCSB. So, if we don't want the same situation that happened in our housing agencies, our education agencies, then we have to set up a different system. So I think the two main levers that we have as a city, given that Mayor Bowser is really comfortable with the current system is to really right now in the next 4 years work through the council to be able to push for that type of oversight.
Would you lobby for that with them?
Yeah, I would. I'm happily work with the council for that. And I will say, teacher, right, that I am not anti-charter school, but I do believe that there, as Joshua said, that there needs to be a fair playing field, and there's currently. So I think that shouldn't have anything to hide. My school doesn't have anything to hide, and but with that, we need to be able to make sure that we're not hurting the system by being less transparent.
Yeah, I might point to an example of a problem that I've dealt with on the lottery advisory board, which talks about which goes to this not apples to apples comparison between the two sectors, but when that creates problems. At the first meeting I went to as a new member of that board, we were given updates on statistics having to do with last year's lottery and the pickup as enrollment was going to start for the new academic year. And there were, if I remember, 4 charter sites that had, announced pretty last minute changes in terms of we've just decided not to open this site, or we're moving someplace else or something like that. That I can't imagine how disruptive that was for families. And the idea that, and it was presented to us, because I guess this had gone on for a long time, as sort of a given. This just happens every year. We have a few that just don't open, and it's too bad, so sad for those families. And I got really animated by that. And we've tightened those kind of requirements a good deal. And, again, apples to apples, DCPS came back and tried to do it. It was only for one classroom that they wanted to reopen the lottery for. But, that was unfair because that was only going to probably go out to the community around that school and not really get much wide attention. So we fought back against that. This kind of equal treatment before the public, I think is very important.
Okay, thank you all for that. We have actually reached the bottom of the hour. It's now 12:30. I want to thank those who are joining us live. You are tuned in to the Education Town Hall here on We Act Radio, which is located in the heart of downtown Anacostia. We are, however, coming to you live virtually on our digital platforms that I consider to be Anacostia adjacent. And for those who are tuning in, listening after Wednesday, October the 19th, we appreciate you joining us as well. We have some wonderful guests that are running for the State Board of Education. For those who are not familiar with the education system in the District of Columbia, we have a state board state that handles state level functions like any other state does. So if you live in a state, you can understand that. That's what we have. We have no local school board here anymore. And so we are joined by Michael Sriqui, Joshua Wiley, Robert Henderson, and Ben Williams, who are running for various races here in Ward 3, Ward 6, Ward 5, and Ward 1. Thank you all for joining us. Valerie, I'll let you start us off.
Okay, I wanted Robert to have a chance to weigh in, if you wish, on that question that we were just discussing before the bottom of the hour.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie, because that speaks directly to the concern I raised earlier about having comprehensive planning, cross-sector planning. The way that it works now, the charter board's independence kind of precludes any sort of comprehensive rational planning. So I can imagine some sort of like binding plan, that would require the charter board to work within some boundaries. I'm not sure. I guess under the current system, that would be under the mayor. And it's not clear to me why the deputy mayor for education can't do some of that now. I'm just not sure why that isn't happening now. But I do think there's a real need for that kind of cross-sector binding planning.
So let me ask all of you, and I want to start with Robert. How can you, on the current state board, push forward that idea of planning? The deputy mayor for education it has a very odd relationship with our charter schools, but basically it's mostly hands-off. However, the deputy mayor is undertaking two rather large projects that do implicate charter schools, one of which is the boundaries for DCPS schools, which are district schools, which have boundaries and have schools of right. And the other thing that the deputy mayor is undertaking and is in fact prioritizing among his projects is the master facilities plan, which will encompass all of our school facilities in DC and describe them in incredible detail. However, I want to just preface this, and I'll let you go, is that in 2018, when the last iteration of the master facilities plan came out, the council rejected it because it was not a plan. It was a list of facilities, and it went into excruciating detail about those facilities, both DCPS and charters, but it was not a plan. And what we've had since is exactly what Michael outlined, which is that every year there's some weirdness about where a charter school might be or whether it's going to open at all, and that's not a plan. That's just a weird idea of a marketplace, but it's a marketplace in which we're both the winners and the losers. So with that, sorry, Robert, take it away, please.
Yeah, I think the state board should take the lead in trying to get the public engaged in that process, and engaging, ward by ward with the community, getting them involved so that they can give input on these processes.
Anybody else jump in?
I mean, I just lead with the example that the market left alone doesn't even run the market very well by itself. So why do we always think that unregulated anything is necessarily a good thing? On the question of facilities, I would point out, and this is probably an issue that's more unique to Ward 3 because of our enrollment situation here. What we're looking for is a plan, and I think we're looking for lots of plans in lots of places, and an enunciation of real goals and objectives that we want to meet and timelines to get there. You mentioned the master facilities plan. I'd look at the adequacy study also. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't just have here's the fiscal lift that you need to do, and sort of, hint, you're not going to get it done again. Perhaps this time there could be, a sort of a roadmap to getting there, so we know what numbers we're advocating for from fiscal year to fiscal year.
So I just want to add on to that. Part of the issue with DC charters is that there can be up to 10 approved by the charter board every year, and there's no limit on expansions of existing charters. So basically, we have a ceiling of infinity for our charter growth. And I think that budgetarily, that puts immense pressure on schools and political officials. So I just to put that out there, because the charter board has really pushed back against having any limits on that.
Well, let me jump in there also on that. I'm gonna be a little more succinct. Each of you, do we have overcapacity? I mean, do we have more seats than are currently needed? Should we look more closely at right sizing the entire system? That includes charters. Quick answers, because we're moving to a number of other topics.
Yeah, I'll say yes. Right, okay. We have declining student population, and we have some places with way too many open seats. And you can't run a school system well when you have one massive school system and then 63 individual LEAs. So you have to create a comprehensive plan, as Robert said.
Yep. And to help balance that,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joshua.
So to help balance that, right? So they count the enrollment on October 5th. Well, after October 5th, DC Public Schools gets an influx of students from charter schools, some charter schools who put them out. Let's count the students in the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, and see where the students are, and that way be able to get a more accurate, or if not even more time,
in the middle too, Josh.
Yeah, in the middle, and get an accurate representation of the amount of students in schools. Because I know, on October 5th and June 5th, that number is not going to be the same, by a long shot. So making sure that we're holding those students, all schools accountable for, and their budgets to make sure they can maintain and sustain those students.
I think we had a guest on this show who's a teacher, and he said that the class I start with at the beginning of the year is not the class I end with the year, and it was just sort of mind blowing.
So I've been asking this question for a number of years. Does any of you think that there should be a moratorium on opening more charters until we get a handle on our current situation? Anybody
when we have an idea of a better idea of what a proper number should be. I mean, right now, I don't think we do. It's just an idea being floated out. It comes across to me as very political. To answer your last question, though, Thomas, or I don't know if Valerie asked it, I'm sorry. The short answer to whether we have a glut of seats is yes. We definitely have a glut of seats. But running to represent Ward 3, it's very important to me that and I convey to who I hope are my future colleagues that we have the opposite problem, and that we have an over-enrollment issue that we need to deal with responsibly and not cynically, and that and that we pursue investments in space for DCPS here.
Robert, did you have an opportunity to chime in?
I would also answer yes about the we have more seats than students, but I think we need to plan very carefully also, not just to think that we'll have declining enrollment in every place, because I know in Ward 5 we are expecting major development in several areas, so we need to be very nuanced and attentive to those kinds of variations in the future. And also, I live in a place where we closed our local school in 2013, right before hundreds of townhomes and apartments were added.
I agree. It's the enrollment numbers are cyclical. I'm 67 years old. I was born in 1955. So once I became of age, I've seen things go on and on and on. I've seen a number of plans being put in place that are still sitting on shelves from decades ago. So that's another problem. You could develop a plan and it doesn't get implemented, or it begins the implementation, and if there's a change of administration, and then it goes away. I mean, I can even share with you the story. I know none of you know this. Um, Back in the 70s in Southeast, there was a block of schools that was actually taken out of the DCPS inventory and given to a private entity to manage. That was before the charter board. None of you know that. So I guess.
So, what now? You can't just drop that and not tell us how that worked out. What happened?
In fact, it was run by a former school board member. I'm not going to name any names right now, but it was run by a former school board. It was advocated by a school board member, but it was a group of advocates in Southeast that wanted to take control of Ward A schools.
And so did it work?
They lobbied to have that done, and it was done for a while. It was an experiment, just like many other initiatives are. It didn't ultimately failed, but I'm just saying we have gone through so many iterations of our education system in this town, and we're still convoluted. We're not focused in a way that I think we all should be focused. I like I started out at the top. You all are running for very laudable reasons, but we've got to find a way to bring more focus on the proper direction, have everybody rowing in the same direction. I don't know. Do you agree with that? I mean, because we're kind of all over the place. We got all these folks on the board, and you have those same number of different opinions. I mean, how do you have impact on your colleagues? What is your agenda when you get on the board? I'll start with you, Chris.
Thanks. I think my agenda is to not be ideological, and to really work with other people to put forth the best needs for our students and families. And I think I want to be able, as a charter school teacher who still believes in the importance of at-right schools, I want to be able to create a system in which we don't pit kind of charter schools against DCPS, because both sectors hurt when that happens. We really need to find a way to work together. And there's too many conversations in DC education and DC politics really as a whole that are happening in silos. And so, there are certain things that the mayor does that I do not like, but I want to work with the DME and I want to work with the mayor to be able to drive and improve our schools. The same with the council. And, I think there are certain scandals that we've seen, with the $2.2 million embezzlement problem at KIPP, and that doesn't mean that all people at KIPP are awful people, but that does mean that we need greater accountability for situations like that so that they don't happen again. And I think there's a level of honesty and collaboration that is missing in good faith conversations in education. And that's the spirit that I would plan to approach the role with.
Yeah, Michael, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, well, hopefully shaking my head, yes, but it's because Ben's made some really absolutely excellent points. And if it's not clear yet, structure in government is something that I think about a lot when I think about these things. And there's sort of this dual structure of the way that the board tends to work, right? On one end, it's advocacy. On one end, it's policy. And I think the idea of 9 people who care a lot about education putting their heads together and coming up with some practical and good solutions that we can then advocate to leadership about is really good. That on the advocacy side, where sometimes things get lost, is that because it's elected and their political campaigns, the board gets drawn into larger disputes, and those are tend to be counterproductive. So focus on the policy piece, and on the advocacy side, focus on what you're getting out of your policy collaboration. I think the board would be well served and serving folks if it did more of that.
Joshua, you're smiling. Take it.
So I just think we need like a hard pause. Like we shouldn't let's stop and look at everything we have, and then every day, in the schools are there for one purpose, and this is for the students. And so any decision that should be made, that needs to be made, that has to be made, should be with the students first, and making sure that they have everything they need to be successful. Like let's stop opening. We should never close. Let's stop opening and just let's see what we have, lay it all out on the table. And I think everyone who really cares about education will see like, okay, let's see what we have. Let's work together. Again, it's not about any one person, how they feel. Again, it's always about the students. Every decision should be made with the students first, at the forefront. If it doesn't impact the students or it doesn't improve the students' learning experience, it really shouldn't be too much more to talk about when it comes to education, and that includes teachers, right? So teachers make the students' learning experience better. So if it's not around those things that are immediately affecting the students, then, we shouldn't be arguing about those, but only worried about what can be the best possible outcome for the students and everything that affects in schools.
Robert, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want us to work as a system that makes sense for students and families. I think we need to have a system-wide, a district-wide approach so that all the parts are working together for the good of our students.
So I got one final question. I know Valerie has, because we're running out of time. That's why I said I wanted to be as wide-ranging as possible. So I want to ask each of you, what super policy power do you think the state board needs to have right now to be more effective? Ben, you want to jump in there?
Sure. I'll say succinctly, like they need to be able to initiate questions to OSSI that OSSI is required to answer. You can't, if OSSI is able to ignore the request of the state board, then the state board is not able to best advocate for students and families in DC, and that needs to change.
Robert?
I don't have a better answer than that.
Okay, that's fair. Joshua?
Yep, I'm doubling down.
All right, double and triple down. Michael, you going to make it unanimous, or you have another perspective?
No, that means that Ben got the best answer, but I have a baby step. I have a baby step that we can take to get there first, which is to get the council to give the state board something that ANCs enjoy, which is a standard of review called great weight. I don't know if how much you're in the weeds with how ANCs work, but when the ANC writes a letter to the agency,
yep,
the agency is
very
supposed to.
With that. Yes.
Okay, so the agency is supposed to give it this little extra standard of attention, and that's not important in terms of the outcomes because they'll never listen to the ANC if they don't want to. But what it does require is a written response explaining why we disagree with you. And as a start on the road to where Ben is going, like I'd really like to have that. And I think an elected body of 9 people, ward-wide and 1 at large, kind of deserves that from the agencies that it interacts with. So I would press the council for something similar.
That sounds good in theory, but I can't count the number of ANC commissioners that have complained about them being ignored and not giving great weight over the years. If I have $1 for each one, I'd be a millionaire probably. So that standard exists, but it's not being adhered to. Let me put it that way.
I agree totally. On outcomes, it doesn't exist, but sometimes it's important just to get them to acknowledge you and give you the information, and we don't even get that on the state board. So I think it would help a little. I'd like to push for it.
Okay, that's fair. I understand. I'm gonna allow. We got about 11 minutes left. 10 minutes left. So Valerie, I know you have another question.
My only question is, how would you ensure greater equity in our schools, and particularly in our schools of right, because they have an obligation that no other schools in DC have, which is to educate everyone and anyone who is in bounds. And I'm going to just preface this by saying this Saturday, October 22nd, in front of our City Hall, the Wilson Building at 1350 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, DCPS librarians will hold a read-in to protest the stalling of legislation by our DC Council that would ensure that all DCPS schools would have librarians. And this was a widely supported bill, and it's just been sitting there, and I can't figure this out, why it's just sitting there. It seems like such a low-hanging fruit to ensure equity, and right now we have tremendous inequities between our schools. And I'm not just talking DCPS and charter, I'm just talking within DCPS itself, and I can't speak to the inequities in the charter sector, but I believe that there are considerable ones. You know, how would you use your position on the state board to ensure greater equity? And let's start with you, Michael.
So, sorry, I lost my sound for a second. So yeah, looking at equity, I'd like to, kind of start with looking at funding formulas and seeing how they're working. I, applaud the intent of the new funding formula to like better address the at-risk weight. But there are lots of inequities in terms of the results. And, in an institution like DCPS, a funding formula is bound to have its like inconsistencies. It's just too big. And with, comparisons with areas like Ward 3 and other areas of the city, that's even like two systems in itself that you're applying this uniform formula to. So it causes inequities. The problem is that we don't address the inequities with flexibility at the school level, I think. And that's why I was troubled by the bill before the council that the chairman had introduced to sort of layer statutory mandates on top of a system that already produces a lot of inequities. So, stability is really important, but so is flexibility. And I don't think we should lose sight of one for want of the other.
Joshua, please take it away.
Absolutely. So at a by right school, right? We have to take everyone that comes through our doors with open, loving arms, which we do. However, we may not have all the resources, and a librarian is just the tip of the iceberg, right? We may need EL teachers or English learning teachers. We may need SPED teachers. We may need additional space. We may need aftercare. There are so many things that students need in a school. And people always talk about school choice. Well, it's only a choice if your by right school is a choice. You don't have to go to it, but that should be a choice on your list. I think it's a resource thing, right? You need to make sure that all schools have the resource. All schools can afford. They can afford librarians, principals and assistant principals, math specialists, reading specialists, social workers, counselors, psychologists. They need all that. And so once they get the funding and the resources they have, that's when schools can start even begin to discuss equity. Until then, it's never going to be an equitable system. And so all schools can make sure they have what they need to serve the population that they serve and make sure that all students can be successful.
Thank you. Robert, take it away.
So we need adequate funding so that the at-risk funding that is supposed to provide extra resources for students who need more resources goes to those students, not to cover up other gaps. To Joshua's earlier point, we need the counts to accurately reflect the population being served by the schools. I think that would help a great deal. Interesting about if we agree that every school should have a librarian, that should be for every DCPS school and every charter school. The equity changes depending on how you're defining the universe. And I think if we agree that that's something every school should have, then every school should have it.
Do you believe that the state board should have additional oversight over equity issues? Anyone?
Yeah,
I would say
definitely
yeah.
in the mission.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Ben, why don't you weigh in on my question and Thomas's?
Sure. So the latter part of your question was, how do you kind of see your role?
Yeah.
And so I think the main thing there is that, and the greatest power that we would have as state board members is really to use the bully pulpit to draw attention to the things that need to be addressed in DC education, because statutorily we do not have much power to address all of these things that we really care about and that we've been talking about today. So I think one of the main things that I would want to use that bully pulpit for would be to create an education standalone committee in the council. I think, Councilmember Mendelson has, the chairman Mendelson has thoughts on that, when it's a standalone committee, it's not adequately staffed. Okay, so devote more resources to staffing it and create, and make sure that people can show up to their elected leaders to talk about the issues that someone can make a decision on and can legislate from. That just seems basic in terms of creating a democratic system, right? This is, it's funny because I teach a class on DC history, and much of our history, right, is an anti-democratic history, right? We still don't have home rule, we don't have statehood, but we have so much agency in the communities that we have, and in people's willingness to want to be a part of changing the system. And I think the role of the state board is to play that role right now of building consensus to change the system. And I think that until we do that, we're not going to get to the issues that everyone else talked about. And, Valerie, you had mentioned school librarians. There's other issues of safe passage right now. There's other issues of, Councilmember Lewis George is walk without worry bill, right? Our kids are going to school without the resources that they need to be able to get home safely every day. And that's not being addressed because there's not an education standalone committee that we can clearly hold our legislators accountable to making sure that student safety is actually a priority and not just rhetoric. And that's really kind of unacceptable in a lot of ways. And every parent deserves to feel that their government is doing what is necessary to make sure their kids get to school to and from safely. So I would also work with Councilmember Chang to work on literacy, which I think the training that Joshua alluded to is super important to make sure that we don't have these gaps in literacy. And there's a lot of other things in terms of accountability with funding that I would try and push for. But the main answer there, just to summarize succinctly, is to leverage the bully pulpit as best as I can and to build coalitions, because things can get done when people can work well together, and nothing can be done on our own.
Wow, I like that response. There were so many other things that I wanted to get into. I didn't get a chance to get into parent and community involvement, which is important to me. That's one of the things that are closest to my heart. That is the reason why I created the Education Town Hall, to give parents and students an opportunity to have access to the public square, to push back against policymakers who can call press conferences anytime they want. But and then also assessment, which we didn't get a chance to get into. But we've got a minute left, and so I want to just say good luck to each and every one of you. I appreciate each of you for coming on the Education Town Hall. You've been wonderful guests, and I want to say you're now friends of the show. Feel free to come back anytime. This is your home now. Feel free to come back at any time when you have something to say, something to share, or particularly if you have breaking news for us. Okay, come back here. This is where you want to do it at, and we will welcome you with open arms. I want to thank you again, Michael Sriqui, Joshua Wiley, Robert Henderson, and Ben Williams, all for joining us here today. I want to first and foremost thank those who have tuned into the show today. We appreciate you because we know you have options, but you chose to be with us today. So we thank you so very much. And I will be remiss if I didn't thank my wonderful associate producer, Valerie Jablo, for putting together this show. Thank you for that, Valerie. She does a lot of the legwork and takes a lot off me. So I appreciate that because I've been doing this since 2012. And I could not leave without thanking our technical guru, Virginia Spatz, who makes the trains run on time. So she's not on screen now, but I know she's looking at me, counting down. Thomas, it's about time for you to wrap up. And so that's what I'm going to do. And until the next time we are able to be together, I want you all to just love someone and be good to people. Until then, peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.